page 2 of our governance draft 2.1 bill, and I believe we are ready to move on to page 3. Does that sound appropriate? Or do you need, or because we're going to do some words later.
Yeah, that's fine. So just again, John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I can tick through these real quickly just in case people have questions, but maintaining quarterly progress reports on ongoing school construction projects, recommending policies and procedures to reduce borrowing, conducting a needs survey, which we've just discussed, developing formal enrollment projections. Sorry, there is one thing I did want to raise, and I guess this maybe we can resolve with the wordsmithing, but in including 7 in 10, we will just need to make sure that that readily available data does encompass more than just what's picked up in that needs survey, because I did understand 7 to be an independent pickup of additional information like enrollment and things that may factor into decision-making in the school construction aid program, but that aren't part of that needs survey because there are things beyond just capital construction, reconstruction, maintenance that might go into the decision-making. So just the language in 7 is broader, but this maybe we can resolve with the wordsmithing outline. Developing formal enrollment projections, encouraging school districts and SGUs to investigate opportunities for maximized utilization. On page 3, collecting and maintaining a clearinghouse of plans, retaining services of consultants, and submitting annual written reports to the General Assembly regarding the status of the program. So we can jump down to section 2, where we have flow through changes from what we discussed on the first page. So this section is addressing the creation of this State Aid for Capital School Construction Board. I would note that we've dropped advisory in recognition of the new powers, which are spelled out here in A. So this board shall review and preliminarily approve or deny agency rules for school construction and capital outlay, and then advise on the remainder of its duties that it had under the previous draft. So again, this isn't the board suggesting particular rules, it's reviewing those that it receives from the agency and then preliminarily approving or denying those rules.
So for clarity, is it do they give final approval to the rules that the agency puts forward before it goes to ELCO? Or is it just the beginning process to allow them?
What's in the draft here is just at the beginning. It's just saying that before the formal rulemaking process can start, the board needs to say yes to the agency's proposed rule. There's no other piece contemplated at the end of the.
But it doesn't talk about proposed rules on line 13, which shall review and preliminarily approve or deny agency rules proposed. So we want to put in proposed.
We can put in proposed. I would note that the actual responsibility, so this is just your creation subsection here. So this is kind of setting up what the board does, which is maybe somewhat looser, but I'm happy to add in proposed if that's helpful.
It seems we need to be clear. I mean, the way I read it is review and preliminarily approve or deny agency rules. So it's saying
The ones that already exist, you mean?
well, if you go back to section 1, lines 9 and 12, before they can even start going through the rules process, the board has to give approval.
So
Before they can even go through the process.
Yes. So I may be able to help out here. So one, we can easily add proposed, but why I was calling out that this subsection is just creation. This isn't what spells out the actual duty to undertake this. If we jump down to, let's see, it's on page 5. We actually set out the duties of what the board is to do. And here we say that the board shall review and approve or deny any proposed rules submitted by the agency to the board and provide a written response to the agency explaining its reason or reasons for any denial. So that's actually tasking the board with that particular duty. The new language that you see that we're discussing here on page 3 is just meant to characterize what the purpose of the board is. Like when we set out the creation of a board, we explain what the board is about, but it's not actually assigning a duty in this subsection. It's just giving content to what that board does. But it'd be easy to add in proposed, but I would just note that the duty is actually made clear that it is only with respect to proposed rules.
Thank you for the clarity, John, I appreciate that. Senator Weeks seems to have a question.
I do have a question. So, we're referring to the paragraph about the creation of the board. Can I recommend that we possibly do like a straw poll or something to see if we even want to create a board? Just to see, because we've got several pages of duties, et cetera, but I for one would like to know if we're really going to create a, I heard support from AOE, but I just sense we might be at a point where we could save ourselves a lot of time and strike it, or we continue the conversation about having creation of a construction.
Rep. Taylor.
I would be fine with doing that, obviously, but I'd like to go further into their duties, because if their duties are going to be things that are gonna eliminate needing to bring on additional AOE personnel, or if it's gonna relieve some of their duties, I would like to know that before we actually.
Yeah, we're not gonna take, thank you, Rep. Taylor, I agree. We're not gonna take a straw poll right now. I appreciate you positing that as a possibility, but I think we need to finish going through this particular draft, so I will cede the floor back to, John.
Sure. So this section, on line 11, this creates the board, which we discussed in previous meetings, and sets up a new duty here to review and preliminarily approve those agency proposed rules and then advise on the program, including setting of statewide priorities, criteria for project approval, recommendations for approval and prioritization. You're going to see highlighting at the bottom of the page, so starting on line 18 for membership, there had been a proposal to add a member from the state board to this proposed board. I did want to note that this results in having 8 members that can create unfortunate ties and the like. So it's just something to think about, that it's nice to have an odd number for boards, but you can please. So the new member, which you'll see on the top of page 4, is adding a chair of the State Board of Education or designee as one of the ex officio members, alongside the state treasurer, BGS, and the executive director. I would note or reiterate what Beth has said in past meetings, that I think she drew these recommendations from Rhode Island, which didn't always have analogous structure. So these are truly placeholders. I think that there was good reason to include those that have been included, but this is, I don't want the lack of blue highlighting to suggest that this is concrete. This is still something that you could resolve who you would like to be on this board.
Martine,
Yes.
and I apologize if I missed whether or not we resolved this last time, but on line 11
Of page 4?
of page 4, what concerns do we have about a member representing an SU or SD and a perceived conflict of interest? I actually would think of it in the opposite way, which is I wouldn't want their presence on the board to mean that their SU could not receive funding. And I'm just concerned about that perception. And if we have a way to resolve that.
No, why we strike it?
Well, hang on, let's not be hasty. Senator Weeks, thank you. 2 members appointed by the speaker, each of them shall represent a supervisory union. How do we feel, folks? I hear Jill's point. I also think it's important to have folks with lived experience or on the ground.
I agree.
I mean, here's the thing. As we all know, living in a small state like Vermont, conflicts of interest seem to pop up in so many places. And I would imagine that this board and even, the AOE to a certain extent is not immune from that. I would like to personally keep that. Yes, Senator Weeks.
Just wanted to, thank you, ma'am. Just wanted to highlight that both paragraphs pertaining to the appointments from the Speaker of the House and the Committee of Committees already require expertise in education. So I don't think it needs to be so specific. They need to come from a background of supervisory unions versus having a background in education or real estate or finance as otherwise outlined. Seems redundant
It,
and too specific.
yeah, a shall, maybe the shall is too
Mhm.
strong.
Okay.
So you could be from an SU or SD, but like,
It's fine if you do something like that. I don't think you would really then need that
Even need it.
phrase. Like,
Yeah.
if that's the change, I would just drop the clause because it's
Yeah.
not adding much value.
So two members, one with expertise in education, construction, real estate or finance, and one, or just two in that.
Members, yeah.
Okay,
So just dropping the final clause.
I see what you're saying. Okay, I could live with that.
So you're dropping one of whom shall represent a supervisory union,
Yeah,
just eliminate that.
I'm assuming you still want to maintain the proviso for those appointed by the committee on committees, which is that one shall be an educator.
I'd propose that we drop that.
two members appointed by the Speaker of the House, each of whom shall have expertise in education or construction, real estate or finance. I don't have a problem with that language.
Period.
Yeah. Or semicolon. Doesn't work.
So retain that piece. Which is the strange part of my-
The educator part.
So you want to drop the educator proviso.
I don't.
Oh, you want to retain it?
I want to retain I'll read it. I'll read the language. Two members appointed by the Speaker of the House, each of whom shall have expertise in education or construction, real estate or finance.
Sorry, and then for the two members appointed by the committee on committees, did you,
Same.
okay,
What?
Same one.
Same as I just read.
Oh, okay. So you eliminate one of whom shall be an educator.
Right, because we've got the word education, expertise in education already there.
So I have a question.
Yes, Representative Evans, we love your questions.
No, you don't. I am looking at the membership of the board. And do we have any other boards that can make a decision on rules that have their appointees are done by the Speaker of the House or the Committee on Committees? Because those are legislative appointments that will be weighing in on the rules. Basically.
But I defer to Beth St. James at this particular moment, because I believe the answer is yes, but
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. I don't, I have looked into this in the past, and so I should have a quick answer for you, but I don't want to misspeak. So if you give me a minute, I will raise my hand to jump back in.
okay,
Is that okay?
super. Thanks. That's a good question.
I mean, I'm going back to what was said, if we lay out our legislative intent, but we give another branch of government the power to promulgate the rules to carry out our legislative intent, is there a conflict there? If we have 4 members of a board that are political appointees from a legislative branch?
I can, and so, again, that's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. I will come back to you on the specific examples regarding rulemaking, but a more general separation of powers issue. From my legal perspective, I do not believe there's a separation of powers issue with, different bodies making appointments to a non-legislative, a body that lives in the executive branch or is independent outside of the legislature and lives in the executive branch. I don't believe that that is a separation of powers issue. Now, there are examples of that. For example, I know on the top of my head, the Commission on Women has appointments by both the governor, House, and Senate.
Do they promulgate rules?
That's what I'm looking at right now.
I also would just observe, this board does not promulgate.
They don't promulgate, but they weigh in.
They do weigh in.
They weigh in.
They're a gate.
Exactly.
So that, I'm just putting
Which is
that on the
significant.
table so that we're really clear.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? And when you say also, you've got the state treasurer, commissioner of BGS,
Mhm.
executive director of the bond, chair of the Ed Board. Do they have voting powers? They're ex officio.
Yeah, the ex officio just speak to by what role do they have their role on this board? It doesn't speak to the actual powers that they have, so they would have voting power in this instance. And I would agree, I don't see a separation of powers issue, particularly what you're thinking of there is that you've impermissibly delegated authority or there isn't sufficient guidance. This would actually boost, to an extent, you could say, having political appointees on a board advising on.
Wonderful, great question, Representative Emmons. We are waiting for feedback from Ledge Council, but we can continue on. Where are we now?
I think we're mid-page 4.
Okay,
So we've gone through membership.
members with 4 terms.
Members, I don't know that we need to go over these pieces, but
No.
I'd like to. This is just procedural, spelling out the terms.
Yeah.
On page 5, we do see the substantive change. So starting on line 8, this is duties of this newly created board. The board shall review and approve or deny any proposed rule submitted by the agency to the board and shall provide a written response to the agency explaining its reason or reasons for any denial. There's plenty to discuss here, even beyond if you agree to the concept. This just grants broad discretion for that board to deny rules. It doesn't set out any basis on which it might do that. The only requirement is that they say yes or no, and that they then provide a response, assuming it's a no, but this would allow the board to have complete discretion as to whether or not it wants to stop the rule from proceeding. So if you like the concept of the board having this first step before the formal rulemaking process, I would seriously consider if you would like to constrain or provide guidance as to what they're meant to do in this situation.
Senator Weeks.
So does, thank you.
Yeah.
So does as we construct this, does the construction board exist to the indefinite future? And what real role do they have once the initial set of rules are established? Are they?
Sure. So the remainder of their duties are advising the implementation of the program. So that's project priorities, which I think the group has concluded would be something that would change over time and that you would want regular input on those pieces. So it certainly contemplated that this would be perpetual or
But again, they advise only.
Mhm.
The remainder of their duties are exclusively advisory, but it would be about priorities, if there's legislation that's needed to correct the course of the program. All the pieces of responsibilities that the agency has set out, I say all, many of the responsibilities that we walked through in the first section, the board is meant to advise on those as the program progresses. Because what you're doing today is setting up a program, but it's entirely we don't know how that's going to work in practice. So this is meant to be a board that can course correct essentially and provide guidance as to what's meant to be done in the future.
It provides guidance, but doesn't make the final decisions.
No. So the only change to the board, which was entirely advisory in the previous drafts, is this new role where it can say yes or no for proposed rule from the agency before the rulemaking process begins. And then that's it. It doesn't have a say at the end of that rulemaking process. No other duties beyond what was in the last draft.
Yes.
So this is actually where I think maybe we need to have that conversation about what is the level of detail in the rules, right? Because depending on what that level of detail is, it's either every element of the construction program, and therefore the board really has a lot of power in shaping the actual implementation and day-to-day operations of the program, or the rules are more like what Rep. Emmons just called out, which is sort of like a policy framework and this is where we're going. So I feel, John, correct me if you don't agree, that this is actually something we do need to sort of figure out. What is rule and what is policy with a small p for this program? Like, and also, John, can I ask a question? H, was that called out in the previous section for AOE duties? Because that feels big.
Subsection H.
Yeah, on page 6, line 13.
Yeah, you know what? I wanted to talk about that too.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet.
Okay.
Can you just back up? Because your first point was a good one. So we're getting back to rule versus small p.
And there's one, I do think it makes sense to talk about what you want rules to be. I would just note that depending on how that conversation goes, if you do want the board to maintain a role where it has this gatekeeping function as to rulemaking, I would note that you can limit where it has that ability to gatekeep. So you could say that it reviews and denies or approves proposed rules about X. You could say that it's about a particular content. It wouldn't have to be, if you like this structure, that the board has gatekeeping power as to every proposed rule that the agency puts forward in the school construction program. It could be, we're really concerned about these particular pieces. So let's say that they have a gatekeeping function for, I don't know what it might be, but you could limit the scope of what the board is doing, even if you accept the concept here. So just something to have in the background. It's not a all or nothing choice.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. For clarity, just for those of us sitting at the table, Jill, if you would engage in this exercise, could you give us an example of what some possible rules might be that would come forward from the AOE? And Bob can certainly jump in here too, but just could we sort of have do a little scrimmage and see what it would look like?
Okay, we can try. So is it possible to pull up the existing?
You want the 6,000 here?
Yeah,
That's what I was.
so I think that's really helpful because
Got it.
there's some that's like nice framing language, and then there's some that's like, thou shalt have X square foot.
Yeah.
And I think,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I hear you and I completely agree with you, but I think it might help us if we see some specific examples.
okay, so there's the policy and purpose, which is that nice framing language, which by the by, I totally agree with, should be in.
I'll
Okay,
skip definitions.
yeah,
If you want to jump to,
so like site requirements,
Site
right?
requirements is something I think we should look at.
Yeah,
Rep Emmons, we should look at it in what
Well,
what lens?
That's, anticipated community uses of school facility. We've talked about that.
So do you think that should be a small p policy that lives in the agency, or do you think it should be a rule?
I don't know. That's a question to figure out.
to me, this is the sort of thing that would go in the programmatic guidance, right? It's, for me, just in my experience in the agency, when we have funding programs, the agency is tasked with building out those requirements that meet statutory language and requirements, right? We go back to what's in statute, what are the eligibility requirements, what are the assurances, et cetera, and then we build out the detail for those. So something like this, this actually, I think, would be particularly challenging to have in the rule series, given the anticipated changes. I'm also wondering, I'm doing this on the fly, so no one's allowed to hold me to this. What's in here is largely what is required in the facilities master plan, which is one of our eligibility criteria. So we have like this nested thing here. If the eligibility criteria are saying thou shalt have a facilities master plan, and then the facilities master plan has really specific things that they have to do,
Right.
then I don't know that you need it here.
It's a good point.
But I interpret this a little different, because
No, that's fine.
I'm
Let's have the
interpreting it,
conversation.
where do your state dollars go? Because it's really clear, all construction and site development to be included in the construction aid project. Your construction aid project is what your state dollars fund. And the state dollars must go to the project on land to which the school district has clear title in fee simple or permanent deeded easement or right of way. That's telling where your state construction dollars are going to go. That's how I.
Yes, and so
interpret
there might be pieces of this,
Right.
right? But I would say like 1 through, I mean, we're really getting into the nitty gritty here,
it. But
but like,
that's what the rule, that's what,
That's what we need to do.
that's
Yeah.
all this part of what's in place right now for the school construction program
Mhm.
lays out where your state dollars go, what is eligible for your state dollars.
yes. And I think, I agree. I
And
think
that's
that
what-
should be what's in here.
And that's what your new rules will need to put out there if we have state dollars going to school districts for their renovations or construction or addition or consolidation. What's going to be eligible in all of that construction for our state dollars? That's what your rules need to carry out.
But the eligibility is really going to come from that priority scale and maybe the bonus incentives. So those are the two drivers of where the money's going to go, correct? Jill, am I right? Okay. And that isn't necessarily a rule. That is in policy.
But I agree with Rep. Emmons that something as basic as we're only going to give state dollars to the sentence that starts basically all construction and site development to be included in a construction aid, blah, 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 must include, it has to be on land that the district owns, really.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
That, we're never going to change that
Or you have
requirement.
capacity for water systems.
Yes,
to
exactly.
respond.
Like,
Those
those
are
are the
structures.
fundamental,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I do think that there is some things here that, yes, those are firm, those will not change, right?
Or you go up a little bit, it talks about air quality and environmental hazards when selecting a site for a new school or addition, that you need to avoid or minimize the potential for contaminants. That's,
Sorry, where is that?
that's where is page 3, top of page 3. Wherever you were, yeah, school board shall evaluate.
Yeah, the bond, amortization,
Air
accessibility
quality
standards.
issues, it's right at the top there.
Yes.
I mean, those are,
So the school board shall evaluate air quality issues and environmental hazards is actually one of the requirements of the facilities master plan, which is an eligibility criteria. So what I would suggest is a really close look at this and where can we simplify or move? Where is it already encompassed in other parts? And then where are there things that just need to sit here forever, right? What I would want to aim for, this is my experience of the rules, is that sometimes when we have details in there that are likely to change over time, it becomes really challenging, and we know that riddled throughout our rules, we have a lot of things that are out of date, but yet we continue to operate.
Right.
So I think that what I would like to do would be to really sit down and go through and say, which of these are never, really, like, we have a high degree of confidence that we are never going to provide state construction aid dollars to a building that a district doesn't own.
Okay, and I agree with you, Jill. My question for us right now is, we have one meeting left after.
Yes, that's exactly.
It is 11:30. So we are putting together a framework or a structure for future work to
Yeah.
occur. How granular do you feel that we need to be today? Because really, today is the day when we
Yeah.
need to flesh out the structure.
I mean, could it even be something, John, like at the end of this, a lot of times we have a timeline section, and it would be something like, the agency shall conduct a review of the existing rule series 6,000 and report to the board by bobbity-bobbity-ba with any proposed changes by, I want to give us time to hire a staff. So, let's say fake number January of 2026 or something like that. That would be.
Yes.
Could we have that as a task so that we don't have to do that review today? But
Yeah,
that it would then go to the board, like, these are the
I
proposed.
think that's a good idea. Yeah, we can ask Ledge Council to make that amendment.
That works. And I would just note in terms of use of time, I mean, the reason that you're granting rulemaking authority in these places in the first place is because of the division of expertise. So even if we had infinite time, I don't know that it would make sense for us to go through these.
That point, that is a very good point. Okay, fantastic. Representative Emmons, do you feel comfortable with that? Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
I mean, you gotta look at the rules and update. And I
Yeah.
just want to be very clear that we also are clear in legislative intent, what we want covered in our rules.
Yeah,
We have to be very, very clear on that. I don't know if we are or not.
And the place to see that is on the first page. And if I scroll up, when we're looking at the agency responsibilities, here's what we have pertaining to school construction and capital outlay. That's the guidance that we have for rulemaking. So this can certainly be expanded, made more fulsome. But generic, here's the subject matter to rulemaking on this.
thank you.
Is that, and that's all of 6,000? Is it all of 6,000?
So, sorry, this is what's in the proposed draft. I'm not sure what the rulemaking
Okay.
basis for the state board currently, like how built out that language
Okay.
is, but it might be worth.
Let's dog ear this and come back to it if necessary, and then proceed back to page 5, where we left off.
So, were there further thoughts about, this subdivision C1? This is people accepted the general concept of a board being the first step in that before it proceeds to formal rulemaking, and if so, do they then want to cabin what the board focuses on? Big, kind of high concept questions here. This is a substantial duty.
I'm happy, and I personally am happy with it.
I'm provisionally happy with it, but as we get all the way through, do I reserve the right to come back and say only this part?
So provisionally content with that, and then we're moving on to, I know you had the issue with H on page 6.
Well, can I ask 2A, John, on line 15, project priorities, do we mean the prioritization points? Is that what we mean by that?
We can mean that, right now, the way that I would read this is kind of what the framework for prioritizing projects, which I think is what your prioritization points is getting at.
Yeah,
But you could also imagine the board taking this to mean, like, this is fairly flexible language. The board could take this to mean I'm having a say in the way that you actually do line up these projects. I want this project to go forward. I don't want this one. So
Yeah.
you guys just call
This other language for that line,
Yeah, I do.
A.
okay.
I do.
Go ahead, Senator.
Project priority methodology,
Jill, is that?
or something to that effect.
Yeah,
Creating methodology. They're advising on methodology is what they're actually doing.
Your rules are gonna determine what your if your rules are gonna play into determining the priority of each project. Right?
No.
I'm thinking about the stacked, like the presentation that we gave with the proposal and how does this project consolidate 2 schools, 40 points?
Right,
Does this, so
but you gotta lay that out in rules.
I don't know. that
No,
we do.
that's in
Well, I think
policy,
you do.
that's in policy at the AOE, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I think that, personally, I would think that would be
But then
a
how
rule
do we?
creation.
Okay, that's creating, so what I was going to propose is, what I do think is missing here is the ability for some sort of 5-year review of the
Priority scale?
priority scale. Again, we want stability. We don't want to be changing the priority scale every year. But as our education system transforms over time, would we say, okay, we prioritized projects that offer consolidation or projects that address school safety and security for the last 5 years. We now want to shift those points. That I do think is a collective decision.
So let me throw another monkey wrench into this, because that plays off a little bit here. I'm looking right now at our current rules, standards in the State Board of Education. And it has determining a priority of projects. Commissioners shall evaluate and rate the degree of need for construction in accordance with the system for rating proposed school construction projects.
Mhm.
So what you're just talking about, would that be a system for rating proposed school projects?
Yeah,
And if so, should that be housed, right now it's housed in the State Board of Education? Should that now be housed in the Agency of Ed?
Well, so, yes, I mean, so
So that's,
from my point of
That's what we
view,
need to
we're
be
taking,
clear.
so the rules are, they're no longer gonna be housed at the State Board of Education. That's, that's what we're doing, right?
that's what we're proposing to do.
Yeah.
So the system for rating proposed school construction projects, which determines your priority,
Yes.
will now sit with the Agency of Education.
And I think we're also saying that we want, this is just me speaking, you guys can disagree, but I think we're also saying we want to whittle down these rules. We want there to be fewer rules that are more high level and have a lot of the policy, which is on the ground work, which you've already been doing at the AOE, live in a different place in policy.
so here's how I would see that play out in the real world. So I would say that 6118, determining a priority of projects as it exists in rule, which is just a statement. It's a
Right.
one sentence statement that you just read.
Right.
That would continue to be in rule, but the way that that would play out in our current proposed structure is that the agency would go in front of the board and say, you know, we propose to have this rule. And the board would say, okay, you have to tell us what your proposed system is, or I could not anticipate any world in which the board would say, okay, whatever you pick as your points, we're fine with, go right ahead, right? So that is that check, right? That we have another group of folks who are going to say, no, 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 you need to tell us what this looks like.
That's an
Even if
advisory.
the actual,
Yeah.
even if the actual point scale is not called out in rule, which it,
But Jill, that's in an
Isn't it right now?
advisory capacity, not in a rule
Your
capacity.
rating, there's a rating system for prioritizing your capital construction projects. And part of that is type of system, current space, current health and
well,
safety.
sure, I mean,
All
that's
of that. So that will rest
I'm
all with the
talking about
agency. and when we
30
propose-
points for safety and health.
Right, and that's,
22 points for,
and that will be laid out in the proposed rules that the agency promulgates.
they're not currently in the rules.
It's in their, it's in their
It
standards.
says thou
that's-
shalt have a system, not,
Yeah,
But here's your system, and it's the State Board of Education. And then the board adopts that and updates it from time to time. And there's a rating system for your eligibility projects. That's all sort of in their rules. So is the Agency of Ed going to be in their rules promulgating the rating system for what is eligible for school construction dollars? You've got to have some eligibility for those school construction
Yes.
dollars unless you're just handing them a
I think we're
grant.
having the same conversation.
Yeah. I just want to be clear.
yeah, so you're already doing this.
Yes.
You are currently doing this.
Yeah.
And this does not exist in rule, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
But there's no dollars right now attached to any of that. Well,
Well-
there is through the ed fund and
Yeah.
all of that, but if you're doing a school construction project and you got state dollars going to our districts for specific renovation, specific construction.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
We're
but
not there yet. We don't know if it's gonna be funding or financing and what the
But
finance.
but you still have state dollars somehow.
True.
And that has to be accounted for. You have to know what's gonna be eligible for those state dollars, or is it just a grant that you're handing out to the district and use as you wish?
It may be that we're using some language here loosely. We are spelling out specific eligibility conditions in statute. That's what's contemplated in this draft. And we'll get to that piece. So you can spell out the actual eligibility conditions for which state funding would then flow, and that's in law. That's to be complied with. It would be additional pieces like how to prioritize those that meet eligibility conditions, right? They are this. Under law, it's been decided that this group of projects is something the state deems worth funding. And then rulemaking or whatever piece you guys would like to have take care of this, can then develop a framework for prioritizing projects that the state is saying, we think all these are worth funding, but we recognize we have limited funds to actually appropriate for these. So how do we decide which ones to put first in line? Like, that's the way I understand the framework.
Okay, yeah, and then we need to move on because it's 20 of, yeah, but
So here's a suggestion. To me, the critical role of the board, in my mind, is again that collective responsibility for how state dollars are going to be directed to specific projects to support educational transformation, right? That is the critical role. And so I'm wondering if, in addition to the board being the gatekeeper for rulemaking, if the board also has a specific responsibility to direct the agency on a 5-year cycle, what the prioritization scale, and if we go with a bonus incentive structure, what those specific percentages are. I would argue that the agency should not be setting those specific, because that's the dollars, right? That is literally how we are prioritizing funds. And I don't think that it's appropriate for only the Agency of Education to be responsible for that. I do think that's actually a board function.
but that will be in an advisory capacity, correct? Not in.
No, they would direct the agency, thou shalt give 20 points to these kinds of projects,
In rule,
15
in
points.
rule.
Well, the board's not promulgating the rules, it's the agency.
No, but so my understanding
What does
is,
it have to be? I'm sorry, what does it have to be in rule? This is just, it's,
I think Rep. Taylor and I are on this. I think he understands what I'm saying. What we have here, from what I glean, is that the board is advisory only, except with rule.
yeah, so I'm actually proposing
Bit of
something
change.
different. I'm actually saying.
Okay, you're saying make.
So it has like two critical functions.
Okay.
One is that it's the gatekeeper for the agency's development of rules that are the backbone of the actual program, right?
Okay.
And then its second critical function is I'm just going to keep saying 5 years until someone tells me not to, a 5-year cycle. They will direct the agency for how to prioritize projects by assigning point values to specific priorities. And the agency is happy to suggest those. And also they shall determine the state bonus share for, the actual percentages for specific kinds of projects.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate that.
The ed committee's coming up.
I appreciate that.
And then I think actually, if you did that, then some of this kind of laundry list of things that they're advising on, I don't know that they do need to advise the agency on the development of a formal enrollment projection model, right? Like, is that actually their area of expertise? I don't know. We could leave it in. Advise is such a loosey-goosey term. But this kind of goes back to H, for me, is actually where they should have real power to do those specific things, and that's really directing the scope of funding. Because we don't have that in here yet, right? Who is determining the points and the bonus share?
No, we don't. Senator Weeks.
So if we're jumping to H, I just don't understand why long-term vision for the statewide capital plan is not a direct responsibility to AOE, and why this would be assigned to some type of part-time board.
So this is just within they're advising the agency on doing this piece. They're not actually.
But it's,
I think that it isn't the agent, like the agency in this role, we have come forward with a proposed plan for prioritization and bonus incentives. But you'll notice that in that proposed plan, which was the framework, we did not actually put percentages on any of those bonus incentives. And our points were an example. That I would respectfully disagree. I don't think that is up to one agency. This is the collective work of transforming our education system, and everyone needs to sort of have skin in the game.
I agree. Yes.
When you have too much skin, too diverse, too distributed skin in the game, you get no vision, and that's where we are right now. I really think we need to be mandating that the AOE have developed a long-range vision, not only in capital plan, but also in across the education system
The
in general.
State
And I'll
Board of
leave it at that.
Education is tasked with creating a strategic plan for the state education system.
Everything we're doing is neutering the State Board of Education, and this bill included, which I fundamentally support, but I just don't understand, because you jump to age intentionally. To me, it's a very clear AOE responsibility, and I don't think we need to muddy that.
I also,
part-time board.
I respectfully disagree with you. I mean, I'm just going to posit that there are folks in our community who have, no offense, Jill, or anyone else, but a deep mistrust of governmental entities. So it is critically important that we have a body that is made up of folks in our community, folks from around the state, folks who have a different lens and vision and who are on the ground. Trust me, I am in the middle of a school construction project, and it's important to have local folks chiming in on this work that are not government employees.
And trust me, that having heard constituents over the past many months, that this is one government agency or board or organization creating another government organizational board, which doesn't have any more clout with constituents than what exists right now. And all I'm trying to hone in on is that we're creating a part-time advisory board when we already have an agency that's tasked with all these responsibilities. And they should exercise that responsibility. We shouldn't dilute that. That's my only.
We're giving them a lot of, or we're allowing them to hold on to a lot of their responsibility. I don't believe that we are taking away a large part of their responsibility in this. This is just a check on their work.
I think that because what is contained, I don't want to pick on H because it was just words on paper. But what that is actually the dollars. That to me is where the setting of those priority points and then the setting of the bonus share percentage is actually where the dollars go out the door. And to me, I feel a little bit uncomfortable with that solely residing with the agency of education, because in this workflow, the secretary or the board, we haven't really decided that, would be making recommendations for which projects should be funded to the legislature. And I would assume that the legislature would not put their thumb on that scale and say, nope, we actually want to do these projects instead, because that would actually be a subversion of the whole process. So I'm sort of assuming a good faith there that wouldn't
You know what
happen.
assume means?
Yeah,
Because we have done that. We have moved those projects around. They would come in as a capital bill request. These are the priority listings. These are the duties. This is the state obligation. This is the money that we need to appropriate for the next fiscal year. And we have changed that list.
So maybe we need a strength
We've
there
done that.
because
It depends who's sitting,
process.
who's sitting on those committees.
Yeah.
And the makeup of the legislature, and who wants their district funded. So we've changed that every year.
Rep. Taylor.
I actually agree with what you are saying on the funding piece of it, but I actually agree with what you are saying on the vision piece of it. And if the vision piece right now is housed with the Board of Education, why are we going to move that from the Board of Education? Why wouldn't they continue? Why would we give one entity the vision and the funding capabilities? Why wouldn't we leave it with the Board of Education where it's housed now?
Well, the State Board of Education is supposed to maintain a strategic plan for education for the state of Vermont. I've never seen it. I'm not sure if they've actually had the capacity to do that. So, and this is a strategic plan that is solely focused on building, right? And school construction. So it's not, I don't see it as the same as like
But we're integrating everything else into that bill. Because we're trying to do school construction as the mechanism for consolidation or decreasing.
Yeah, but a
ethics.
strategic plan for education includes personnel, curricula, lesson plans, maybe, all kinds of culture and climate. I mean, that's a huge piece of body of work. I just see this as a subset of that work. And here's the bad news, folks. We've only got 5 minutes until lunch. And the rest of the agenda is pretty well mapped out. So it's looking like we might need to add an extra meeting at some point to finish up this work. How about we spend the next,
Aren't we supposed, we only have a half,
we'll see.
half-hour lunch and we come back to the draft, right?
No, no.
There's a vote
But I don't
scheduled.
think we're ready.
We're not ready for a vote.
No. So,
I will say, I think we're getting to all of the really interesting.
we are. Can we just quickly broad brushstrokes, John, if you wouldn't mind, just like take us through real quickly the last 3 pages.
So I would just encourage folks, as this decision is made, just to go through the existing tasks for this board that are advisory, and to the extent that they don't map onto independent duties of the agency, like what was just identified in H, it's just important to note to make sure that there is alignment and that it's purely advisory, or if you think advisory is inappropriate, then alternative suggestions, would love to hear them. We can jump down to past, we have a new section starting on page 7. Section 3, this is just setting up a special fund. This is very generic language. This is just what's under statute, the kind of language that's required to set up a special fund. This does not resolve any financing problems. It doesn't change the source of funds. What you see is a placeholder at the top of page 8, describing the funds in the special fund as those transferred appropriated to it by the General Assembly. If it's decided a revenue source is found, that can plug into right here. So this is entirely placeholder language. This is just meant to stimulate conversation in this area. And then section 4, this is really the meat of what's done in this draft. The language that you'll see here, this is approval and funding of school construction projects. This is drawn almost entirely from existing section 3448. And the idea behind this whole draft bill is to repeal what is existing chapter 123 and replace with the provisions here. So there's still more to come in this space. But you may recognize this is setting up preliminary application. A school district that intends to construct or purchase a new school desires to avail itself of state school construction aid shall submit a written preliminary application to the secretaries, and that shall include information required by rule. That approval, the secretary is to consider, and this is at the bottom of that page. This is what's in existing section 3448. The secretary shall consider, as part of that review process, regional educational opportunities and needs, economic efficiencies, and the suitability of an existing school building to continue to meet educational needs, and statewide educational initiatives and the strategic plan of the state board. This is some of the conversation that you guys were just having. This is highlighted in blue because my understanding is that the state board is tasked with developing this plan, but there may be questions around what's done in this space, whether it's sufficient. But for now, you have placeholder language saying that it's meant to match this strategic plan that comes from the state board. You could change this if you wanted to have a different kind of strategic plan here.
Yeah, that only gave me pause because I've never seen a strategic plan. So, but,
Would be hard to match one that doesn't exist. Yeah.
right.
And then we have the same conditions from 3448 about the secretary may approve that application if it fulfills particular needs, including these conditions threaten the health or safety of students. They're inadequate to provide programs required by state or federal law or regulation, excessive energy use, deterioration of an existing building, that the need addressed by the project cannot reasonably be met by other means, and that the proposed type, kind, quality, size, and estimated cost are suitable for the proposed curriculum. That's all existing law in chapter 123. But what you see next in subdivisions 4 and 5 is new language based on the eligibility conditions, which is what I think of this particular subsection as covering. The eligibility conditions that were set forth by the Agency of Education. So in 4, you see, this is at the very bottom of page 9. The applicant achieves the level of proficiency in the school district quality standards regarding facilities management adopted by rule by the agency. So that's the first new piece as an eligibility condition. And at the top of page 10, you see the applicant has completed a facility master planning process that has to meet 4 separate conditions, engages robust community involvement, considers regional solutions, evaluates environmental contaminants, and produces a facilities master plan that unites the applicant's vision statement, educational needs, enrollment projections, renovation needs, and construction projects. So this is tracking that framework that was discussed in the last meeting or the meeting before. There's things you could do with the language in the space, like saying the word united. But I think just given the high level of conversation we're having here, maybe not worth diving into the weeds there. The priority section that you see here in the middle of page 10. This, we're getting to the rulemaking discussion that we were just having. So following approval of that preliminary application and provided that funds have been voted for the estimated cost, the agency, with the advice of the state aid board, shall assign points. So this is a decision-making point, whether you would like that board to have advice on the assigning of points. The agency shall assign points to the project as prescribed by rule. So I think it's exactly the discussion that you guys were having, so that the project can be placed on a priority list based on the number of points received. This is different than what's contemplated in 3448 currently. The remainder of this matches what's in existing law. So once projects receive points, if they remain on that list, haven't received funding, they will continue to be bumped up as the years progress. And then you'll note that the remaining subdivisions you see here don't have any content. This is specific because we haven't resolved these particular questions. If you would like to see language that fills out what this could be, you can look to 3448. And if we had more time, I would be happy to pull that up. And maybe after lunch, we can do that. But the idea is it's worth looking through the remainder of 3448 to see what a full process might look like. I just didn't want to derail the conversation from these huge decisions above.
Okay.
And then
Maybe over lunch. Thanks, John. Go ahead, sorry.
and then the final piece here, section 5, there was a request to ensure that appeals were possible. If there was if a municipality felt that the decision-making hadn't worked out in their favor, this is what's currently done in chapter 123 with slight language tweaks, but the same concept here to permit within 30 days an appeal to the Superior Court in the county in which the project is located. And that's the whole of the draft here. I would say you're going to want to focus on section 4. And maybe comparisons to 3448 may be useful, but this is actually getting into the process and beyond the governance piece.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
I'm gonna do just that while I eat my lunch. I'm gonna look over 3448 and see what that looks like. Any questions or comments as we proceed to a half-an-hour break for lunch? And I know Senator Weeks has to step out right at noon, so